Patrick Johnston, here we are enjoying the great outdoors, at least for one more day before our April showers come to tell us again what Vancouver is really like. So let's jump into this quickly as we sort of look back and look ahead on the Canucks' plight. It's so funny to me. We were talking earlier just about stories and angles and stuff for the weekend, and this team really does take you on a roller coaster. I mean, from the start of the season all the way through to the week off and then the COVID debacle afterwards, and they come back and there's all this debate about how badly the players had it and whether management's standing for the players, and they beat the Leafs and everyone was like, hey, you really could make the playoffs, and then they lose to Ottawa. And not just lose, get shut out. What's your sense of where this team is right now? The return from the Leafs, was that just an emotional jolt? And really, how do you assess their chances at the playoffs going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a little bit of adrenaline involved. Obviously, goalie of both ends was so much of the story. Braden Holtby probably having his best game of the year last Sunday, and then I mean the Canucks played well. Don't get me wrong. They played quite well on Tuesday night. And David Riddick did not play well for the Leafs in goal. Leading me to, of course, tweet out a list of terrible goalies from the past who probably would have done better. But I think the reality is that there was also, just, let's be honest, some adrenaline there. I think it was just like, hey, we're back on this, especially on Tuesday, I think, because, they'd had that one game. They were now sort of 4 or 5 days back into really being back on the ice. They were still probably a bit more preseason mode, but still at least they've had a chance to skate, have some normal rest. But then I think what we saw Thursday night was really the sort of reality of where their baseline now is at, which is that it is diminished. Even if they hadn't had COVID, being off the ice for 3 weeks, getting out of your rhythms like that, getting out of your sort of game shape is going to be a thing. And then, of course, there is the illness, which, for many of them had real physical effects, whether it was lungs or not. Just your physical capacity was diminished. And so, we saw Thursday night, Travis Green, in the end, this morning asked a bit more about it. It was actually quite critical. He thought that there were players. He basically said, listen, if someone wasn't healthy enough to play, he wasn't going to play. So as far as he was concerned, there were people healthy. Everybody that was playing was healthy enough to play. And he said, the people I was criticizing weren't necessarily guys that had COVID. So you're sitting there thinking, the list isn't very long, guys that didn't. And you're looking at, JT Miller, maybe you needed more from JT Miller. Maybe you needed more from Brock Besser. Maybe you needed more from Jimmy Vesey. That's kind of your list right there. And it's one of those ones where you're like, okay, yeah, your top players in the end in a game like that need to be your best players. And, I thought they were okay, but in general, they were guys that, the Canucks struggled to get to the inside to get shots. And if you're going to, this team, we know, where your best players go is where this team's going to go. They don't have a whole lot of depth down below. And it's a tough mix. Like you said, it's a roller coaster because, after those 2 wins, okay, there is a chance. And there still is a chance, but, you do the math and they lose that one game. Montreal wins that one game, even though the Canucks have 4 games in hand. They're still 10 points behind Montreal, and to get to sort of that 62-point total at the end of the season, that means they're going to have to win 11, 12 games, and they only have 16 games left. It's playing at a pace they just haven't played all year. So it's sort of like, okay, this is really a monumental task. And then again, at least for the next little while, they're not going to be at their physical optimal. And then they play this insane schedule. You and I were trying to add up the math. That they play Ottawa on Saturday, then they fly to Ottawa for 2 games, and then they're in Toronto for 2 games, and then they come back after playing a back-to-back in Ottawa and Toronto. They play in Toronto next Saturday, and they come back. They play 2 games against Edmonton, then they go back to Edmonton. It's relentless. It's just this hammer that keeps getting them, and they're just never going to get out from under it. And then all of a sudden, the season will be over.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing about that is, and thank you for bringing up Travis Green, because that will segue into my next question after I get through my long-winded explanation here. But yes, we were talking about the amount of games that they had in light of what Demko had said about the brain fog and general fatigue. And also what Travis Green said is such classical coach speak. If you have a star who's injured, we don't care about them. It's next man up. And then if you're healthy enough to play, I'm not putting any caveats on. Well, you really need to get your conditioning back, all that kind of stuff. But I think it raises a fascinating point, which we were talking about earlier. People are looking at this situation now, and coaches always dance around this until they're mathematically eliminated. Like, is this a chance to get a real good look at some players to understand what you have for next year? If you were a coach under contract who knew you were coming back next year, who knew that the ownership believed in what you brought to the table, that would be a worthwhile folly. Is you're sitting there going, I need to know what Rathbone, Uelevi are like. I need to know, like, at what point can I trust them to be, where can we take them with coaching and conditioning, etc. If you don't have a contract, do you want to be at the helm of a team that's going to absolutely collapse down the stretch because you're playing young guys and then damage your own market going forward? How much do you think this is an issue? Obviously, a coach wants to win every game, but being essentially what we call in sports a lame duck, how is that shaping the way the Canucks are going to finish the season here?
Oh, it's a huge issue. It's all the incentives are. It's a mess for Travis Green. I have a huge amount of sympathy for him in this. First of all, I made it clear, like, this is a guy that's, I think, been a good coach for your team. He's done the best of what he's had. He's a guy that deserves a new contract, and here he is. He doesn't have one. So you've created this scenario where, he's coaching to win, but really, is he coaching to win to get a contract here, or is he, in the end, he's trying to make sure his resume is solid at the end of the year? Like, I did everything I could to get what I could out of this team. I totally get why he's taking that position. Yeah, absolutely. In a team that was really truly planning for the future and wanted to truly understand what its prospects were like, I think they got a sense what all Uelevi is. But yeah, you look at a guy like Cole Lind, who was called up from Utica after needing some face surgery and essentially was able to sit in quarantine, and now he's essentially practicing with team. I mean, this is one of the side points, is that weirdly, because the Canucks have a few guys on LTIR. Michael Furlan obviously has been there all season, maybe there for the rest of his contract, but Jay Beagle's also there now. They do have a bit of wiggle room in terms of roster flexibility, and because we're after the trade deadline, there's no roster limit, so they can carry all these extra bodies. But as we've seen all year, with that's not necessarily a great thing, because in the end, the guys don't get to play, and then there's a few taxi squad guys that Mike DiPietro he's sat on the bench once. Brogan Rafferty got into a game once, but it's just kind of one of those scenarios where you've got guys. I guess you've already made your decision on Rafferty. I think is probably one of those guys. But Cole Lind, now he's here. You're telling me he couldn't do better than Mark Michaelis? Mark Michaelis, I advocated before. I wanted to see him, and to be honest, he struggled. I think maybe he's a guy that might have done a bit better if he'd been able to play in the American Hockey League and really get used to how pro hockey goes. He kind of has been thrown in the deep end, but that said, he's gotten time. He didn't play a ton on Thursday night, so maybe there's a change over there just for strategic reasons. But you're right. Jack Rathbone. Let's see what he can do. I think he deserved. Certainly the way he played in the AHL, he deserved a taste up here. Is he better than Olli Uelevi? We don't know. Is he better than Jalen Chatfield? Probably. But he doesn't play the right side. The kind of the options go on and on and on. And now, of course, Alex Edler's back. So, you can understand why the coach is going to put a guy like Alex Edler in the lineup, because he, in the end, is probably going to give you a better chance to win than a raw rookie. But you don't know that. But Travis Green can't afford to find that out. And so here we are. That's not much of a plan.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think at this point of the season, especially if they don't go on like a 6 or 7 game tear, everyone's narrative is going to quickly shift to like, hey, let's see the kids play. Let's turn this into a young stars tournament in a way, because then you know what you have last year in the Canucks have obviously between Hughes and Besser, and they have a tremendous pedigree of bringing guys in at the end of the year to really raise your spirits and hopes for the following year. I've been muting my microphone back and forth because there are airplanes flying up above. I can't see if there's any banners behind them. This thing is silly to me. It's fans can express their disappointment any number of ways. We've seen bigger issues for sure over just performance, but we've seen a large protest in England today. Banners, New York Jets have flown them. Where do you stand on the Benning banner?
Well, I mean, I'm the same. People are perfectly, especially when they're not allowed in the stands. I mean, this, and if they're going to respect social distancing, I mean, they shouldn't be, gathering at the stadium as I guess they did in London today to protest the Crunkies. But like, the thing I find kind of amazing is the bizarre lines that people want to draw, saying, well, Crunky, tried to leave the league and try to create a new competition. So of course his fans are upset with him. And I'm like, yeah, that's a perfectly legitimate reason. And so people being upset with the general manager is not a perfectly legitimate reason. Like, like you go search, like Carlo Ancelotti, one of the more beloved managers of all time, has been involved in fan protests against him. You know what I mean? Like it's
And
a
part-time West Van resident, we might add.
Vancouver West Van's finest, and it's just one of those ones where this need to somehow define, well, this is what a fan is. It's like, give me a break. Fans can cheer however they want, cheer your own way and don't worry what other people are doing. If you want to speak passionately about your position, go for it. But like, don't define it based on what you're not. Define it on what you are. And you know what? That's fine. If fans are allowed to express their opinions the way they want. I mean, let's be honest, within the bounds of good taste. It's not like anyone's dropping turkeys out of the sky or anything like
that. However, if you want to, the old WKRP reference there. You and I had a conversation again about how we treat that story, and it's somewhat lighthearted. I would never advocate personally for someone to lose their job. You can critique performance. Having said that, these contracts are guaranteed, and these we're not talking about frontline workers here. We're talking about the general manager of a hockey club and who's had a hand in firing many other people as well. So, or not renewing their contract, depending on how you want to look at it. Yeah. I have been surprised, and maybe it's just the evolution of technology. We've seen divisive coaches and general managers before, but I've never seen the lines drawn so sharply as they are with Jim Benning. And again, I don't know if that's just because the platforms are available now. If these platforms would have existed, for a Dave Nonis, would that have been different? But honestly, the division amongst Canuck fans over that one position continues to astound me. You've dealt with Jim for several years now. I believe you. Correct me if I'm wrong, that you think the organization is due for a change and let someone else have a crack at the helm. But ultimately, what is your assessment of the job Jim Benning has done?
Well, I mean, in the end, I'm not going to go on my way, but you asked me and I say it's a results-based business. And at this point, obviously the season's not over yet. Miracle could happen, but at this point, it'll have been 2 playoff runs in 7 years, only one of which really is his team. And that to me it's a surprising level of patience from an owner who had gone through 2 general managers in the 7 years before. It was 6 years, 9 years before. 2 general managers in 9 years before hiring Jim Benning, and basically in both cases, one because he missed the playoffs and I think also wouldn't make a trade he wanted to make, and then the latter one because obviously there had been a huge falling out over the forward progress of the team and where it needed to go. So after a very successful run, but one that I think most were concluding was rightly coming to an end anyway. It's a surprising state of affairs, but I think we can read between the lines how the relationship is between the manager and the owner. So in the end, like, that's my assessment. But
okay, your assessment. What do you say between the lines? Is Jim Benning back next year? Not for you.
I think so. I think so, because I think in the end, this is an owner who has been in the NHL for a long time now. I think has long had a sense of what he wants, rightly or wrongly from our perspective, but he seems to know what he wants, and certainly Jim Benning seems to share that point of view, or at least is willing to go along with it anyway.
Great stuff, Patrick. I think we'll leave it there for this week. Lots to talk about next week because we've got like 12 games in the next 7 days or something.
I was going to joke though. I mean, Stu Cowan has his Hockey Inside Out show. We have our Hockey Outdoors show at least for another week anyway.
I'll be out here with the rain jacket next week.
All right, catch you later.